Hey, folks, good morning and welcome to another episode of Steelers Morning Rush. I'm Alan Saunders. It is Tuesday, January 28th. Today is the first day of practice at the 2025 Senior Bowl here in Mobile. Very excited to get back out to watching some football this week. And I have a handful of prospects that I'm really excited to be watching this week at the Senior Bowl. Derek Bell, a great Steelers analyst, just wrote a breakdown of some of those players over at SteelersNow.com. I encourage you to go check it out. Jalen Milroe, quarterback from Alabama, of course, we talked about yesterday on the afternoon drive. And Jackson Dart, Jalen Royals, Devin Neal, Johnny Walker, Azaria Thomas. It is a pretty solid group of players here in Mobile for the Pittsburgh Steelers and their draft needs. But today I'm going to talk about the wide receiver position specifically. It is not particularly deep in this draft class. It is the one position, I guess, outside of quarterback, where Jim Nagy said yesterday there isn't a quarterback in this draft class that would have been in the top 6 last year. Outside of quarterback, the other position that I don't think is very deep for the Steelers is wide receiver, and especially here where a couple of the guys like Mayor and Savion Williams that I was really excited to see have pulled out. There are still some players here. I mentioned Royals. That's one that's really interesting to me. He's from Utah State. There are players in this draft class, and there may be players available to the Steelers in the first round. I'm just not sure how deep it is compared to some of these historically deep wide receiver classes we've seen recently over the last couple of years. And Stephen 116th, a great commenter here in the YouTube platform all the time, asked yesterday, would you say that you would draft a wide receiver in the first round no matter what you do with George Pickens, or is that only if you've got a trade in place? This is a really good question, and I think really interesting thought process about the Steelers offseason. So the Steelers basically have 3 options with George Pickens. They can trade him, they can let him play out the final year of his contract, or they can sign him to an extension. And I really think no matter which of those 3 options they pick, and almost no matter what they do in free agency, I would still entertain the idea of a wide receiver in the first round. And there's a couple reasons for that. Let's break down the options with George. Even if you sign him to a contract extension, even if the intention of the Pittsburgh Steelers is to have George Pickens be their number 1 wide receiver or number 2 wide receiver for a long time, look at what just happened with Deontay Johnson. We just saw them go into a second contract with that intention and then not get very far down that road before they're right back drafting wide receivers. Okay. And the Steelers wide receiver room has next to 0 depth behind George Pickens and Calvin Austin. They need 3-4 wide receivers to fill the room. So I don't think it is superfluous to draft a first-round wide receiver and sign George Pickens to a contract extension. The idea would be they play together, and also it gives you a bit of an insurance policy in case this contract doesn't go the way you think it might. If you decide you're going to go into this season with George Pickens just as the guy, of course, you would use a first-round wide receiver. And, of course, if you're going to trade George Pickens, you'd be willing to use your first on a wide receiver. And I think those two, it doesn't matter what happens in free agency. Even if the Steelers get T. Higgins, which we've talked about not being particularly likely, but he's the big fish, right? Even if the Steelers get T. Higgins, if they've decided they're not going to give George Pickens a contract extension and that either they're going to trade him this offseason or this is likely going to be his last season with the team, heck yeah, draft a wide receiver in the first round to go with T. Higgins. The position is that important. I understand the Steelers have been very successful drafting wide receivers beyond the first round. They have a track record with that. I guess we can now start to question, some of that track record based on how some of these tenures have ended. If you're talking about shipping off George Pickens early as well now, on top of Deontay Johnson, on top of Chase Claypool, you're starting to see a bit of a negative pattern there. But the other thing is this draft class is just not that deep. And it's especially not that deep in terms of guys that have the size, speed, contested catchability, and separation the Steelers don't already have. Like, they already have Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson. And I know Roman Wilson had a lost rookie season, and Calvin Austin's very small, but those guys are NFL players. And I think they're going to be at least positive contributors to any offense. But Isaiah Bond from Texas is another 5'10" wide receiver. Tez Johnson from Oregon is another 150-pound wide receiver. There's just a lot of what the Steelers already have and very little of what they actually need in this draft class. So, yeah, I think the idea of, we talked yesterday, it's deep at running back. It's deep at defensive tackle. It's not deep at wide receiver. It's pretty deep at cornerback. The other part of this is specifically looking at the Steelers' first-round pick at number 21 overall. I think there's a very good chance that wide receiver ends up being best player available. Had another question on yesterday's show from Calvin Brooks, you mentioned players we are not going to take. Do we take best athlete available or position need first? And I would say that the correct way to do this is you want the best player available at a position of value that is also a need. Okay, that's probably the way that most top drafting teams approach it. I believe that's how the Steelers have approached it under Omar Khan. It doesn't matter if your biggest need is long snapper; you're not going to take that in the first round of the draft, right? I mean, it seems sort of obvious, but I think it's important to say it that way because I don't think, even though the Steelers are probably going to lose Najee Harris, they're going to seriously entertain the idea of drafting a running back in the first round. They do have Jaylen Warren available to them. They just need to tender him a contract. And it's a really deep running back class. And running back, although the winds may be changing on this, is not a position that is strongly valued by the National Football League. Same with linebacker, same with safety. You're not going to draft a position where you just don't need one. You got nowhere to put them. The Steelers are not going to draft an outside linebacker. They wouldn't know what to do with them. I mean, he would never even play. So it doesn't matter how good the player is. The best player available is an outside linebacker at 21. Steelers aren't going to take it. So you have to have need. It has to be positional value. And then you take the best player of those. And so when you look at the kind of draft board, I mean, the Steelers, I think, have a pretty nice setup here. It's early for like where players are going to be drafted in the first round. Generally, I think at this point we have an idea of who the first round talents are. But in terms of the order, it's very, very early. So I'll maybe hedge this a little bit. But like I see a lot of mock drafts where some combination of Grant from Michigan, Egbuka from Ohio State, Golden from Texas, Luther Burden from Missouri, Jade Barron from Texas, Shavon Ravel from East Carolina, Ben Morrison from Notre Dame, at corner, D tackle, wide receiver, that all those guys are available, or some combination, if not all of those guys. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Harmon from Oregon, Tyler Williams from Ohio State. There's more defensive tackles too. So that there's a big group of players that the Steelers could look at. And I think you can kind of look at this and say, okay, well, there are more D tackles later and there are more running backs later, and there really aren't any Egbukas later in this draft. And he's really, honestly, the one guy that I think when you look at who might be available to the Steelers at number 21, to me really stands out head and shoulders among the group in terms of his fit for the team, what they need, his athleticism as a prospect, his extremely high floor. Maybe doesn't have the ceiling you usually look for in a first-round wide receiver, but man, a really, really polished player. And by all accounts, a good teammate and someone that maybe will be able to stick around for the Steelers for a long time at that position, which they have been unable to do for a while. So, yeah, I think almost no matter what. Now, if you re-sign Pickens to a contract extension and you bring in T. Higgins, you're probably at that point don't need a wide receiver in the first round. But unless they're able to really double up, unless they're able to lock up Pickens and bring in someone through a trade or free agency, I think almost no matter what, wide receiver will be on the board, at least as an option for the Steelers in the first round. Thanks so much for your questions, guys. We had so many. I picked 2. I could have picked 8. I'll try to get to them over the course of the week. Keep them coming. I really love them. And, of course, like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications here on the YouTube channel. Be back with more with me and Smitty for Steelers Afternoon Drive. It's just about 6 your time. I'm in the Central Time Zone here. So this is coming up maybe a little I guess I'm right about normal time here. Practice starts at 9:30 my time, so I got to get rolling. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And until next time, enjoy.